私はチャック・ジョンソンです。今からあなたに見せるのはYo, and welcome to episode 6 of How to Defeat Dudes. Okay. Dean, what it is, player? Yeah?
If that means how am I, then I'm fine, thank you.
He's still learning. So, anyway, not too long ago, I was spending time with a friend from the D, and I was illustrating various kind of situation-specific escape scenarios, and as the conversation progressed, he brought to light the fact that a lot of the more traditional kind of escape techniques that are out there may not necessarily apply to a lot of contemporary situations. So I thought that would be a great opportunity to kind of go through them and to illustrate them on the show.
So what did he say?
Well, basically, he was just like, so let's say, I dip through to the dope spot to see what's cracking and get jiggy with some what. Well, all of a sudden, this homeboy gets all up in your grill straight spazzing, because when you was just trying to chop it up in politic, in his own mind, he thought you was trying to pop game on his shorty. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
Okay, so anyway, let's take a look at the next one. Now, let's take a look at the very first bar scenario.
Oh, you mean down the pub with your mates?
Doggone it, Dean, speak English. Not everybody who watches this show is British. Anyway, let's take a look at the first one. So first scenario is, when you have homeboys all up in your face like this and he's blah, 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 blah. I'm asserting my masculinity to you, blah, 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 establishing dominance, all this kind of thing. Okay? Now, the solution to this is actually really simple. It's right there, it's obvious, and that's simply, boom, just give him an elbow to the side of the head. I mean, it's right there and he's not gonna see it coming because you're so close. Now, I'm gonna take a step back to show you the kind of speed that you do this at. So you're here, blah, blah, blah. I'm not giving him any indications whatsoever that I'm gonna do anything. Boom, and then I just throw it, okay? Now, the problem with this technique is that if you nail it, you hit him just right, rattles his brain, kind of shakes him up a bit, he falls down or he gets knocked out or whatever, end of story and it's done. Problem is that may not necessarily happen. If you don't hit him hard enough, if he's got a really thick skull, or even if he's just got a really fast reaction time and he sees it coming, then he blocks it, then the fact of the matter is you've just initiated the violence and it's on, and there's kind of no turning back. The other thing to keep in mind too is that if you're the one that hits first, then unfortunately that puts you in a very different position legally than if he hits you first, in the case that this actually ends up going to court. And anytime you get into any kind of violent situation, you need to remember that. There's always legal ramifications to getting into fights. So you need to think about that, okay? So anyway, let's move on to the next scenario, or what could happen, okay? Which is gonna be a shirt grab, okay?
Okay.
Okay, so I'm here. So we've all seen this. We've all been, seen this a lot of times, where the guy grabs your shirt, pulls you up so he can continue yelling in your face. Situation, again, is really simple solution. This is one of my favorite techniques. It's called the knuckle choke. Now, like a lot of MMA techniques, I think this is a great technique because you can actually use it to put somebody down or to get them off you without actually having to hurt them, which is much better for you legally. Okay, so let's take a look at it. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my hands like this, go inside his collar like this, and then I'm gonna use the index fingers to pinch his trachea like this, and then I'm just gonna pinch his trachea shut by straightening out my arms. I'm sorry, Dean, but this is just gonna hurt.
That's okay, because I'm gonna do it back.
We'll see, buddy. Like so. You okay?
Yeah, that hurts.
Yes, it does. Okay, so now let's have Dean go ahead and give it a try.
Okay. So, how am I gonna do this since you're wearing a t-shirt?
Exactly. Okay. So the problem with the knuckle choke is that unfortunately it only works really well if they're wearing a jacket or a collared shirt. If they're in a t-shirt, you might still get it to work, but t-shirts stretch, so that makes it a lot harder. I mean, you'd have to grab really far back on the collar, and you'd really, really have to pull tight just because they stretch. So let's take a look at another option, shall we? So let's have Dean go ahead and give me another grab. Okay, so from here, what I would do, obviously his hands are busy, he's really focused because he's yelling at me like this. All I'm gonna do is just raise up my hands, boom, and then just box his ears, okay? Now, the good thing about boxing somebody's ears is that it doesn't necessarily cause permanent damage. Oftentimes, people will just lose their hearing for a few days and it'll start to come back, and it's intensely painful at the time. The problem with it, again, however, is that you know, if you do cause permanent damage, then that doesn't necessarily put you in a good place legally, because that may qualify for excessive force, because again, you hit first. Okay? You know, but aside from that, there's a lot of other things that you could do. You could just take your fingers, you could just dig them into his eyes, you know, you could just grab an ear and just rip on it, you know, whatever. There's a lot of stuff you can do from this, because again, his hands are busy, your hands are free. So in closing for this show, you know, we covered a lot of different techniques today. You know, we did the knuckle choke, we did, you know, boxing somebody's ears, possibly an eye gouge, pulling on somebody's ear, whatever. You know, the fact of the matter is, what I really want to stress is that every technique has its strengths and weaknesses, just like every martial art does. You know, everyone has some situation where it'll work perfectly in, and another situation where it may not work very well and may not work at all. Which means you just have to train for a lot of different situations, which is why there's going to be so many episodes of the show. It's because you just have to cover every kind of situation. So beyond that, the other thing to keep in mind too is that aside from the physical strengths and weaknesses of all these techniques, there's also always legal ramifications for getting in fights. So even if you got this amazing technique that you could use to totally rock some guy who, you know, may be threatening you or whatever, you should still always try and talk your way out of the situation or calm the other guy down before you ever actually engage. Simply because even if you win, you know, things happen. You know, you may not mean to, but you may slam some guy's face on the floor, bust his head open, he ends up dying or something, and then, you know, you've got manslaughter on your hands or whatever. You know, things just happen. So it's always better to just not get into fights if you can help it. You know, I mean, personally, I can think of at least 3 different situations where I've walked away from fights that I probably could have won, you know, without even that much work. You know, but the fact of the matter is, it's just not worth it. You don't know what the other guy knows. You know, you don't know if he's got friends in the background or whatever. Just, it's always better to just not fight unless you absolutely have to, or not use defensive techniques unless you absolutely have to. This stuff that I'm showing you guys is last resort stuff. So just remember, just for the last resort, okay? But that being said, train for as much stuff as you can, learn as much stuff as you can, and then hopefully you'll be prepared if or when the situation arises that you do need it, okay? So that's all I gotta say, except train hard, you know, practice until you get the repetition down, and hopefully see you next time. Yosh!